Hari Hari Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Jai Lamees Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Jai Vishaka Priya Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Malini Hari Ram Hari Ram 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Rama 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 Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Hari Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna Krishna Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari 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 Krishna 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 Hari 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 Rama Hari Ram Rama Rama Hari Hari it just, it all depends on how much you breathe. It's as simple as that.
Depends how many times say his name as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. Okay, devotees. Devotees, we are now going to do our reading of Srila Prabhupada-lilamrita. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyachadesha Tarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Right, so we are right at the end of the 9th chapter. Oops. Right at the end of the 9th chapter, a resident of Vrindavan. And actually, we're just about to begin the 10th chapter. Anyway, we'll get there in a few minutes. So, yes, Prabhupada has just arrived. Prabhupada was really feeling he wanted to take sannyas. So he approached, I suppose you might say, the most prominent person in the different branches or divisions, more like divisions, of the Gaudiya Math, who was Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, and asked if he could take sannyas from him, and asked if that devotee would publish Prabhupada's writings and sponsor him or help him to go to the Western world, and was really not treated, or was treated in really not very encouraging ways at all. Basically, the idea was just become an official member and then we'll see. But not just we'll see, but, it's very unlikely that we'll help you with these things, but you never know. But join the mission. So Prabhupada was not pleased by that, so he approached Bhakti Pragyan Keshava Maharaj, another one of his godbrothers, and at least in regards to Prabhupada taking sannyas, Keshava Maharaj was very encouraging indeed. In fact, even more than encouraging, he just said, you have to do it. And invited Prabhupada to come to their headquarters in Mathura. So this is where we are right now. Prabhupada's just arriving. Keshavji Gaudiya Math was located in the midst of one of Mathura's downtown bazaars. Its main entrance, an arched doorway, led into a courtyard open to the sky through a metal grating above. The architecture was similar to that of the Vamsi Gopalji temple that was in Vrindavan, where Prabhupada had been staying. He had a room on the roof there, which was pleasant, very pleasant. The atmosphere was secluded as in a monastery. Abai was a familiar, welcomed figure here. He had lived here, written and studied in the library here, edited the Gaudiya Patrika, and donated the deity of Lord Chaitanya, who stood on the altar beside the deities of Radha and Krishna. Shishi Radha Vinod Bihariji. But his visit during September of 1959 was not an ordinary one. He entered the mat dressed in white, Abai Babu, but he would soon be leaving dressed in saffron, a Swami. Abai had been living as a renunciate for 9 years. There was no need for him to observe a ceremony or to proclaim himself a sadhu by changing to saffron dress. But it was the parampara system that a man take Tridandi sannyas at the end of his life. He was aware of the cheating sannyasis. Even in Vrindavan, he had seen so-called sadhus who did not preach, but simply spent their days hunting for chapatis. Some quote-unquote swamis of Vrindavan even indulged illicitly in what they had supposedly come here to reject, sex life. Such persons were making a mockery of sannyas, and there were the caste Goswamis also, who lived like ordinary householders, running temples as a business to support their families, and accepting honor and donations from the public on the false basis of birth. Abai knew of these abuses of sannyas, but he also knew the real purpose of sannyas. Sannyas was for preaching. On the morning of September 17th, 1959, in the 50 by 25-foot deity room on the second floor of the Keshavji Mat, a group of devotees sat before the deities of Radha Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. The deities were colorfully dressed in royal clothing and silver crowns. Radharani's right hand faced palm forward in benediction for the worshipper. At her side, her left hand held a flower for Krishna. Krishna stood like a dancer, placing his right leg in a casual tiptoe pose before his left, playing his long silver flute, which he held gracefully to his red lips. His long black hair reached down past his shoulders, and a garland of marigolds around his neck reached down to his knees. On his right stood the deity of Lord Chaitanya, his right arm raised, left arm at his side, his body straight, feet together. He was a soft golden color, and he had large eyes, a well-formed red mouth, and straight black hair down to his shoulders. One level below the deities were pictures of the spiritual masters in disciplic succession. Jagannath Das Babaji, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Gaurkishore Das Babaji, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Bhakti Pragyan Keshava Maharaj. Abai sat on a mat of kusha grass beside 90-year-old Sanatan, also to receive sannyas that day. Sitting opposite the two candidates, Narayan Maharaj, Keshava Maharaj's disciple, prepared to conduct the ceremony of mantras and offerings of grains and ghee into the fire. Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji, Abai's godbrother, known for sweet singing, played mridanga and sang Vaishnav bhajans. Sitting on a raised asan, His Holiness Keshava Maharaj presided. Since there had been no notices or invitations, only the mat's few residents attended. Narayan Maharaj chanted the required mantras and then sat back silently while Keshava Maharaj lectured. Then, to everyone's surprise, Keshava Maharaj asked Abai to speak. Abai had not expected this. As he looked around at the gathering of devotees, he understood that the common language was Hindi. Only Keshava Maharaj and a few others spoke English. Yet he Yet he knew he must speak in English. After Abai's speech, each initiate received his sannyas danda, the traditional head-high staff made of 4 bamboo rods bound together and completely enwrapped in saffron cloth. They were given their sannyas garments, 1 piece of saffron cloth for a dhoti, 1 for a top piece, and 2 strips for underwear. They also received tulsi neck beads and the sannyas mantra. Keshava Maharaj said that Abai would now be known as Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, and Sanatan would be Muni Maharaj. After the ceremony, the 2 new sannyasis posed for a photo, standing on either side of their sannyas guru, who sat in a chair. Keshava Maharaj didn't impose any strictures on Abai. He simply encouraged him to go on preaching. Yet Abai knew that to become A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami did not mean merely that he was giving up family, home comforts and business. That he had done 5 years ago, changing from white to saffron cloth, from Abai Babu to Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, had a special significance. It was the mandate he had required, the irrevocable commitment. Now it was only a matter of time before Bhaktivedanta Swami would travel to the west as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had ordained. This was Bhaktivedanta Swami's realization of his new sannyas status. The Gaudiya Patrika's account of the sannyas initiation included a biographical sketch of Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, listing the major events of his life. The article concluded, quote, "Seeing his enthusiasm and ability to write articles in Hindi, English, and Bengali, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj gave him the instruction to take Tridandi sannyas. For nearly 1 year he had been ready to accept sannyas. In the month of Bhadra, on the day on which Vishvarup accepted sannyas, Bhaktivedanta Swami at the Sri Keshavji Gaudiya Mat accepted sannyas from the founder of the Vedanta Samiti, Bhakti Pragyan Keshava Maharaj. Seeing him accept his ashram of renunciation, seeing this pastime for accepting the renounced order of life, we have attained great affection and enthusiasm." Chapter 10, this momentous hour of need. And to begin, there's a quote from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Volume 1. This is written by Srila Prabhupada himself. Our capacity of presenting the matter in adequate language, especially a foreign language, will certainly fail, and there may be so many literary discrepancies in spite of our honest attempt to present it in the proper way. But we are sure that with our all faults in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of the society will still accept this on account of its being an honest attempt for glorifying the Almighty Great, so much now badly needed. Bhaktivedanta Swami, accompanied by some of the Keshavji Mat's devotees, made a short preaching tour of Agra, Kanpur, Jhansi, and Delhi. But he was soon back in his own place at the Vangsi Gopalji temple. No one called him Abai Babu any longer. Even amongst friends, it was Swamiji or Maharaj. And people often addressed him as Swami Bhaktivedanta Ji, Swami Maharaj, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. People readily recognized him as a sadhu and offered respect. Yet his basic problems remained. He wanted to write and print, but he had no money. He wanted to broadcast the message of Godhead, but few were willing to listen. Such things hadn't been changed by his becoming a Swami. When a librarian advised Bhaktivedanta Swami to write books, they were permanent, whereas newspapers were read once and thrown away. He took it that his spiritual master was speaking through this person. Then an Indian army officer who liked Back to Godhead suggested the same thing. Bhaktivedanta Swami took it as a revelation from his spiritual master. As a dependent servant constantly meditating on the desires of his transcendental master and seeking his guidance, Bhaktivedanta Swami felt his spiritual master's reciprocal blessings and personal presence. More and more he was feeling confidential contact with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and now he was feeling an inspiration to write books. He considered Srimad Bhagavatam because it was the most important and authoritative Vaishnava scripture. Although Bhagavad Gita was the essence of all Vedic knowledge, presented in a brief ABC fashion, Srimad Bhagavatam was elaborate. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and Bhaktivinoda Thakur had both written Bengali commentaries on the Bhagavatam. In fact, most of the great Vaishnava acharyas of the past had commented on Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya himself had recommended Srimad Bhagavatam as the spotless Vedic literature. An English translation and commentary for this book could one day change the hearts of the entire world. And if he could publish even a few books, his preaching would be enhanced. He could go abroad with confidence and not appear empty-handed. One day, Gaurachand Goswami, proprietor of the Radha Damodar temple, approached Bhaktivedanta Swami, inviting him to come live at the Radha Damodar temple, being the eternal home of Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami. It would be more suitable for his writing and translating. Bhaktivedanta Swami was interested. He had never stopped his regular visits there, and he always felt inspired in the presence of the Samadhi tombs of the great leaders of Lord Chaitanya's movement, Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami. But when he went to look at the two available rooms, he found them in poor repair. They had not been maintained or lived in for many years. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, however, Bhaktivedanta Swami agreed to take the rooms at 5 rupees per month. It's the same as at the Vangsi Gopal temple. Prabhupada had the one room on the roof. It was also 5 rupees. But you know those rooms at Radha Damodar, of course. Oh, you don't? It's 2 rooms to start off with. And, they're not big rooms, but they're not really small rooms. They're sort of moderate-sized rooms. Yeah. Okay, 5 rupees per month. Yeah. He estimated that for a little more than 500 rupees, he could have electricity installed and extensive repairs made, and when it was finished, he could move in. Bhaktivedanta Swami saw the invitation as auspicious, and living there would complement, his new project. And living there would complement his new project of presenting Srimad Bhagavatam in English. Of all Vrindavan's temples, Radha Damodar had the largest collection of original writings by the 6 Goswamis and their followers, more than 2,000 separate manuscripts, many of them 300, some even 400 years old. Bhaktivedanta Swami looked forward to residing there someday and serving in the company of Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Jiva Goswami. For now, he would remain at the Vangsi Gopalji temple, and with whatever money he could collect, he would gradually repair the rooms. It was an important maxim of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's that a preacher should go to the cities and not remain in the seclusion of a holy place. So in that spirit, Bhaktivedanta Swami continued commuting to Delhi, even though to him it was a hell, and even though he had no fixed residence there. Often he was taken in by businessmen who felt obliged on the basis of Indian culture. A good man, if he wanted to be favored by God, should accommodate the sadhus and give them meals and a place to stay. But the vision of such pious men was a sentimental Hinduism, and their receptions were artificial. They could not really appreciate Bhaktivedanta Swami's work. And Bhaktivedanta Swami was not of a mind to impose himself upon such hosts. Then he spoke with Mr. Hitsaran Sharma, manager of the Radha Press. In the past, Mr. Sharma had printed flyers and stationery for the League of Devotees, and Bhaktivedanta Swami had stayed in Mr. Sharma's house on occasion. Mr. Sharma introduced Bhaktivedanta Swami to Pandit Sri Krishna Sharma, a caste Brahmin and active religionist, secretary to the century-old Delhi Religious Society, Sri Naval Prem Sabha. Out of sympathy for Bhaktivedanta Swami's literary labors, Krishna Pandit gave him a room in his Radha Krishna temple in the Chippiwada neighborhood of Old Delhi. Now, Bhaktivedanta Swami would have a permanent office in Delhi. The train from Mathura would arrive at the Old Delhi station near Chandni Chowk, the broad avenue down which poured a river of workday traffic. Rickshaws, bicycle riders, sometimes a dozen abreast, autos in lesser numbers, men running on foot pulling heavy carts, and beasts of burden, donkeys, oxen, an occasional camel or elephant, carrying heavy loads and being driven by men with whips in their hands. From the intensely busy Chandni Chowk, Bhaktivedanta Swami would take the short walk to Chippiwada, past the Red Fort, keeping the Gauri Shankara temple on his left, then proceeding along a side street past the large, imposing Jama Mosque. Near Chippiwada, the streets would become narrow. Chippiwada had been a Muslim neighborhood until the Indian-Pakistan partition of 1947, when thousands of Punjabi Hindus had settled there. Chippiwada was part of a mixed Hindu-Muslim neighborhood, so crowded with people that cars were not allowed to enter the streets. Only ox carts and rickshaws could penetrate the narrow, crowded lanes, and in some areas the lanes were planted with iron posts to keep rickshaws out. Even a bicycle rider would create havoc amongst the densely packed crowds of shoppers and workers who moved along the streets and lanes. Side streets led to other side streets, lanes so narrow that the second-floor balconies on opposite sides of the road were only inches apart. I've never been in that part of Delhi. Practically forming a roof over the street so that a pedestrian could glimpse only the narrowest patch of sky. Private yards, shops, and alleys became almost indistinguishable from the public thoroughfares. Although most shops bore signs in Hindi with subheadings in English, some bore the curvy scripts of Arabic, and women dressed in black with veiled faces were a common sight. In the heart of this intense city life was the narrow entrance of Krishna Pandit's Radha Krishna temple, with a plaque of the demigod Ganesh and a row of nesting pigeons just above its simple arched door. The temple, with its resident families, retained some of the tenement atmosphere of the neighborhood. Although the temple room was dark, the Radha Krishna deities on the altar were well illuminated. Radharani was the color of cream, and Krishna was black marble and stood about 2 feet tall. He was decorated with dots of fresh sandalwood pulp and a mask of yellow sandalwood on his forehead. Both deities were dressed in silk garments. On the second floor, just above the deity room, was a guest room, Bhaktivedanta Swami's room. Its cement walls and floor were completely bare. Protruding up from the floor was a 3-foot-high concrete pyramid with a spire, indicating that the deities were directly beneath. You know, just recently, not long, I don't know, a year or a couple of years ago or something, as I understand, ISKCON acquired the temple, or just the room? Just the room? Maybe just the room. Anyway, acquired, at least the room. I thought it might have been more, but anyway, at least the room on a permanent basis. Bhaktivedanta Swami soon found that his room was not secluded, but was side by side with other residential rooms. Outside the door, a metal grating, smaller than in the Vangsi Gopalji temple and Keshevji Mat, revealed the small temple courtyard below. From the roof, hardly a single tree could be seen. The view was of tenement rooftops, so tightly crowded together that it seemed one could walk from roof to roof, all the way to the colossal Jama Masjid. The mosque's 3 large domes, surrounded by tall minarets, rose high above the ordinary buildings, attracting flocks of pigeons, which perched upon the domes or flew in wheeling patterns in the sky. Krishna Pandit, dressed in a black, lightweight cotton coat, the kind made internationally recognizable by Pandit Nehru, and he had the Nehru hat also. He spoke good English and was garrulous. He was, it means he was a joker, basically. He was well known and respected within the neighborhood. He saw Bhaktivedanta Swami as God sent, a sadhu for him to take care of, and thus prove once again the piety of Hindu culture. He found his new guest likable, a simple, gentle, gracious, and accomplished Vaishnav scholar. Krishna Pandit said he understood the importance of Bhaktivedanta Swami's Sanatana Dharma mission and his need for a Delhi office, and he vowed to supply his guest with whatever he required. Although Bhaktivedanta Swami was reluctant to ask for anything for himself, Krishna Pandit brought in a sitting mat and a low table, placing them before the pyramid, and he also brought a mattress. He showed Bhaktivedanta Swami how to operate the room's single light, a bulb and metal shade that hung from a cord and could be raised or lowered by hand. He brought a picture of Radha and Krishna that had been given to his guru by the Maharaj of Jaipur and set it within a niche in the wall, relishing that Bhaktivedanta Swami could gaze upon it with the eyes of a true devotee. Bhaktivedanta Swami had wanted a secure place for writing books before going to the West, and Lord Krishna had provided it. Now he could work either in Vrindavan or in Delhi. Almost immediately he began back to Godhead again, serializing book excerpts from his previous manuscripts, while at the same time beginning Srimad Bhagavatam. When Krishna Pandit learned of his guest's lone struggles to produce back to Godhead, he volunteered to help with some of the business aspects of the publication. Bhaktivedanta Swami was indeed gratified by Krishna Pandit's sincere help, and in appreciation he gave him an addition to his name, Hari Bhakta Anudas, one who serves the Lord's devotee. After 6 months in Chippiwada, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote an appreciation in the temple's guest book. Quote, I am pleased to write herein that I've come to Delhi from my headquarters, 1859 Keshi Ghat, Vrindavan, UP, purely on spiritual mission to propagate the cult of devotional service of the Lord. And I am more pleased to mention herewith that Shriman Sri Krishna Sharma Hari Bhakt Anudas has provided me a suitable room for my literary activities. I'm publishing an English fortnightly magazine of the name Back to Godhead from this place, and the Nawal Prem Shaba, of which Sri Krishna Ji is the honorary secretary, is arranging for my daily lectures on Srimad Bhagavatam. Late Pandit Jyoti Prasad Sharma, father of Sri Krishna Ji, was also known to me, and during his lifetime, whenever I used to come to Delhi, late Pandit Jyoti Prasad Ji would provide me with residential place. His good son is also following in the footprints of his noble father. And as secretary of the Nawal Prem Shaba, he is doing good service in propagating Ram Naam all over the city. Unquote. In neat English script, Bhaktivedanta Swami went on to write that, in his opinion, temples should be used solely for educating the public in spiritual values, and that it was his personal mission to organize temples for that service. Quote, temples are not meant for ordinary householders engaged simply in the matters of animal propensities. Those who are actually engaged in the service of the Lord, deity, the predominator of the temple, can only be allowed to remain in the temple, otherwise not, unquote. Trying to compose Srimad Bhagavatam at Chippiwada, while surrounded by sometimes noisy families with their non-devotional domestic habits, had impressed upon him the importance of not using a temple as an apartment house. Despite his plans to settle down and begin the monumental task of translating Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami was ready to preach in other ways also. In October of 1959, he had encountered a news article in the Times of India. 2 American scientists had received the Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering the anti-proton. According to one of the fundamental assumptions of the new theory, the article read, there may exist another world or an anti-world built up of antimatter. The quote-unquote other world reminded Bhaktivedanta Swami of the eternal spiritual world described in Bhagavad Gita. He was well aware that the scientists were not speaking of anti-material in the sense of eternal or spiritual, but he thought of using their scientific terms to capture the interest of scientific-minded people. He conceived of an essay presenting the theistic science of Bhagavad Gita in terms of the anti-material particle and the anti-material world. It was a time when the whole world was talking of space travel. Indian news media had reported the Russian Sputnik 2 years ago, and the race for space had begun. Seizing on the current interest in space travel, Bhaktivedanta Swami described how, by bhakti yoga, the soul can travel past the farthest reaches of space to the eternal planets of the spiritual world, where life is blissful and full of knowledge. He gave his own fresh translations of Bhagavad Gita verses, couched in the language of the new physics, with its anti-material particle and anti-material world. The complete work, Easy Journey to Other Planets, was a 15,000-word manuscript, and he showed it to Hitsaran Sharma of Radha Press. But he didn't have enough money to get the little book printed. In February of 1960, Bhaktivedanta Swami decided to print it himself in 2 installments of Back to Godhead. The articles drew an immediate response from a physicist at the Gujarat University in Ahmedabad, Mr. Y.G. Nayak, who received Back to Godhead through the mail. Dr. Nayak thought Bhaktivedanta Swami's application of the anti-material principle was, quote, really a grand one. This is no doubt a classic essay, unquote. Dr. Nayak was interested in further discussions on physics and transcendental knowledge, and Bhaktivedanta Swami replied with equal enthusiasm, finally asking the physicist to join him in distributing the cultural heritage of India to the whole world. You know, Prabhupada, as soon as Prabhupada would see some interest, he would just get right onto it. Just get completely into it. Convinced that such an essay had great potential to interest educated English-speaking readers, Bhaktivedanta Swami worked hard to raise enough in donations to print Easy Journey to Other Planets as a paperback book. He finally did so in the fall of 1960. A foreword by Dr. N.K. Siddhanta, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Delhi, arrived late, but was included in the book as an insert. Quote, "While everyone may gain from it, the student community in particular is recommended to read the book with care and practice bhakti yoga, which will help to strengthen the mind and build up character. I shall be glad to see this work read by the students and the teachers alike." Unquote. Several Indian scientists and scholars contributed reviews, noting the book's, quote unquote, scientific cum spiritual vision and, quote, the method of speeding over space not by mechanical acceleration of speed, but through psychological effort and spiritual emancipation, unquote. It was only 38 pages, but it was his first publication aside from the one-page folded newspaper, Back to Godhead. He tried to distribute the little book effectively. He gave one copy to Dr. P. Banerjee of the National Museum of New Delhi. Dr. Banerjee, he used to come to the library and consult some books, and I met him there. He gave me a book called Easy Journey to Other Planets. He gave me some copies to distribute for a rupee or half a rupee each. I felt attracted to him. I thought he was a saintly person with pure devotion and without any outward glamour. He was not out to attract people just for name and fame. He had little support from anybody. He was living alone in a small room in Chippiwada. He was devoted to his studies. So I asked him, "Sir, if you have time and you don't mind coming to my house, could you kindly come on Sundays and recite the Bhagavat in my house?" He readily agreed. He was a good scholar. He was learned in the scriptures, and he was fond of communicating his ideas to others. He was a good speaker and a good conversationalist. He was very polite. Whatever he said very distinctly. He spoke in Bengali and explained the essence of the verses. Sometimes he also referred to the commentaries just to give me more information. The others were not very much interested in commentary or in difficult aspects, but because he knew that I had some studies in the field, he explained the commentaries for my sake and for the sake of one or two other gentlemen who were also very elderly and very scholarly. The gatherings at my home would be attended by about 20 or 30 people, and he would continue his explanation for 1 or 2 hours. Then he would recite the Hare Krishna mantra, and we would also take part with the kartals and harmonium. So it was a very enjoyable gathering because he made the difficult things very easy, and he explained everything to all of us according to our needs. He knew that this much is for this person, this much is intended for this man, this much for the others. After the meetings, he used to take a little rest in my house. I requested him to take meals in my house, but he said he did not take meals prepared by others. But when he met my wife, and she said she would be happy to prepare the meals, he said, "All right, I will take." And she used to prepare meals on Sundays when he would come. He sometimes asked me how to get more and more people attracted towards this field. But as a government worker, I could not persuade anyone very openly, nor had I the time to organize anything on a big scale for him. But he was not satisfied with that. He asked me if I could organize on a bigger scale. He knew that the people who attended the meetings at my house were very old, 70, 80. One was 90 years of age, retired, educated persons. It lasted for no less than a year. After that, he said he would be trying to go out to other places. He asked me to continue the gatherings, but I said, I am not initiated. He said I could continue anyway because I was born as a Brahmin. He gave me the authority to continue for some time, but I could not continue because I used to go out. I lost all interest after he left. I was a government servant. It's just, okay, we'll read a little more. Easy Journey to Other Planets had been like a warm-up for his real work of presenting Srimad Bhagavatam. But now he was even more convinced of the need for books. To preach, he would have to have books, especially if he were to go to the West. With books, he could create a spiritual revolution. There was so much literature in the West, but Westerners had nothing like this, nothing to fill their spiritual vacuum. Although he wanted to give as much time as possible to Srimad Bhagavatam, he decided to continue with Back to Godhead by using excerpts from already existing book manuscripts as articles. Occasionally, however, he would write and print a new article. In Relevant Inquiries, he wrote, quote, "We're just trying to make a humble attempt to save the human being by propaganda of Back to Godhead. This propaganda is not fictitious. If there's any reality at all, this propaganda of Back to Godhead is the beginning of that era of reality." Unquote. In A Godless Civilization, Bhaktivedanta Swami referred to Prime Minister Nehru's complaints about the misuse of public funds in the name of religion. Bhaktivedanta Swami noted that although there were undoubtedly instances in which religious leaders were implicated in criminal offenses, if statistics were compared, the religious cheaters would be outnumbered by the political cheaters. Although Pandit Nehru had been right in warning of religious fraud, the warning could not be effective without a thorough reform of spiritual institutions, and that reform could be accomplished only with the cooperation of government leaders. Bhaktivedanta Swami quoted from his letter in which he had asked Prime Minister Nehru to take up the study of Bhagavad Gita. But as he informed his Back to Godhead readers, Pandit Nehru had never replied. Quote, "Because of his lack of spiritual knowledge, he thought that this institution, the League of Devotees, might be something like the so many mutts and temples which have become the source of headache for the Pandit." Bhaktivedanta Swami charged that Pandit Nehru thought that any spiritual organization, quote, "is a dungeon for accumulating public funds and then misuse it for questionable purposes," unquote. Anyway, then Prabhupada says, "He, however, approves of the so-called sadhus who do social service and talk nonsense in the spiritual science. This is so because he has no depth of spiritual knowledge for himself, although he is Brahmin and Pandit. Ignorance in spiritual knowledge is the qualification of the Sudras or the laboring class," unquote. Prabhupada, straight to the point, no mincing his words, no beating around the bush. He requested Pandit Nehru not to be afraid of the word God or Krishna. Quote, But we can assure him that there's no such cause of fear, because Krishna is everyone's friend and able to render real help to everyone, unquote. Bhaktivedanta Swami ended by suggesting that immoral practices were not confined only to the temples of India, but were common to materialistic civilizations all over the world. In particular, he cited the disturbances amongst youth that were becoming rampant in the 1960s, quote, "The best thing will be for the physician to heal himself first, because in godless civilization, while the occupants of the mutts and temples have been the cause of headache for the pundit, the same thing under a different label has become the cause of headache for every European and Asian statesman, for other European and Asian statesmen. The unbridled youngsters of those countries under the name of teddy boys in England, the rebels without cause in America, and the half-strong in Germany, the leather jackets in Sweden, the children of the sun in Japan, and the style boys in USSR are some of the byproducts of a godless civilization. And that is the root cause of all headache. That requires a thorough treatment." Yes, well, you see how, because material life fails to give satisfaction, you get all these young people and old people, but particularly the young people Prabhupada's talking about here. Because the older people, they sort of get fixed in some sort of program. But the young people, they're kind of, they're not focused. And because there's no satisfaction, they don't get satisfaction out of their efforts to enjoy on the material level in this way or that way. So they get into more and more bizarre types of things. What was considered bizarre in my youth is like nothing now. Really nothing. Yeah. And they go into more and more extreme things in different ways. And it's a real... And sooner or later, it just ends up exploding. So that's why we need Krishna consciousness. Keep a focus on the transcendental platform, and then we won't be affected by these things, but rather we'll get a higher taste through contact with Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Right.